Watching this whole future of Super Rugby thing for many weeks now has been interesting, silly, painful, all kinds of things. With the global pandemic, it seems like they're having a look at what's going to happen with Super Rugby, and it just seems to be that working on their own, like New Zealand with New Zealand, Australia with Australia, they're just drawing up their own plans and just chucking up those ideas going, what about this? Not sure that's the best way to do it. Maybe it is. Because, sometimes you go to those meetings and people just end up yapping away and nobody gets anything done. Maybe it is the best way to do it independently, but that seems to be what's been going down so far. So if you haven't been following it was ages ago now that New Zealand came out with their plan from the Aotearoa report, which basically said we need to change the way Super Rugby is operating. Our proposal is from New Zealand, there's going to be an 8 to 10 team competition, notable in the lack of South African teams. South African teams cut to the curbside. 5 New Zealand teams between 2 and 4 Australian teams, and potentially a team from the Pacific or Japan. I suppose it could have been maybe both of these, one each, if they limited the number of Australian teams. So New Zealand clearly saying, we're in a strong position, our rugby is good, you guys should want to be playing with us. You guys can't be diluting the competition, Australia. You need to cut your number of teams down to be more competitive, and we'd like to get a Pacific team to represent at least. They didn't really give, I don't think, that many details about it, and it seemed like the ideas was to base it in Auckland, so it seems like another New Zealand Super Rugby team for me. But yeah, to represent potentially Tonga and Samoa, maybe Fiji as well. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how people from those 3 countries feel about always being lumped together into one. I don't know. But yeah, essentially they said to Australia, give us some expressions of interest if you guys are keen. And this is our plan. So South Africa was omitted, Argentina was omitted with the Juarez, Samoa was already gone. They continue with that line of thought, and yeah, 8 to 10 team competition. Now, nobody really replied to them, I don't think. I think Australia kind of came and went, thanks, but middle finger. Nah, not having a bar of that. The Aussies, and I feel like the way New Zealand Rugby went about it was probably not the most constructive. They kind of went off to the side, made their plans, and were like, right, this is what we think should happen. You guys keen? And people were not keen. I don't know. I feel like these guys should have better dialogue. I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. So Australia's kind of done the same thing now. I think it was out yesterday. Australia's got 2 plans, though. They've kind of called New Zealand's, I don't know if it's a bluff, or they're calling and maybe raising, because they've got 2 plans, one which does not involve New Zealand, one which involves New Zealand. So New Zealand gave the whole Australia, you got a expressions of interest deadline thing. Australia was like, nah, it's fine, all good, we'll come back with our own plans, dialogue continues. And they've now given New Zealand a 3-week deadline regarding a potential Trans-Tasman competition, which is option 2. It seems to be, from what I've read, 5 New Zealand teams, 5 Aussie teams, which is just a Trans-Tasman competition, which doesn't, I guess, meet with New Zealand's objective of fewer Australian teams. It's actually one more. It's going to be back, including these guys, and I have been pretty happy to see the Force playing. It's got to be said. But with a tacked-on feature of potentially having a Super 8 competition, which is what a lot of you guys have said is maybe the optimal way to do this, to kind of keep SANZAAR together but not have us constantly traveling around the other side of the world as much. So the Super 8 would essentially be the best 2 teams from Australia, the best 2 teams from New Zealand, the best 2 teams from South Africa, who are included, even though I almost left them off the whiteboard there. And potentially a team from, it was actually South America, they said, but when I read South America, in this context, I'm reading Argentina and Japan. So maybe that's reviving the Sunwolves. I don't know. But yeah, if it's kind of a Champions League style thing to include a token team from Japan, if it were the Sunwolves, would seem silly. Maybe the winner of like the top league. I don't know. But yeah, the appeal of a Champions League style competition does kind of have some, definitely have some appeal to it. So that's their option if New Zealand is keen to go with Australia. If not, Australia's got a plan B, which is they still keep the 5 Aussie teams, and they'll just bring in 3 teams from Asia and the Pacific. I guess the same way they were doing with the old global Rapid Rugby. Maybe a team from Fiji, a team from China. They could muster up a few teams and have a competition without the New Zealanders. So I'm not sure where that would leave the Super 8 thing. I'm not sure if that would still be potentially viable to be tacked onto this, or if it would be only with this option that Super 8 comes. Because remember, this is still all just being talked about. They've also talked about including kind of following a rugby league style, having a state of union thing. Like rugby league has state of origin, which is Queensland, New South Wales, probably arguably the best, most competitive rugby league games in the world, given they've got some of the best talent there. So trying to replicate that with rugby union, and then also having some changes to the National Rugby Championship, which is the domestic competition in Australia anyway. But essentially, Australia's got a couple of plans, one which includes New Zealand, one which does not. New Zealand's one they had 3 versions of the same plan. None of them were all that phenomenal. But yeah, it is kind of interesting, but also painful to see this play out. I'm not sure what South African fans are thinking right now. The South African Rugby Union will have to be obviously assessing their options as well, as there's clear intent from both New Zealand and Australia to distance themselves from South Africa, because the distance at the moment anyway seems to be a big problem. And I guess the COVID cases in South Africa are probably higher than here in New Zealand and in Australia, so maybe these guys are looking at immediately getting the ball back rolling for 2021 and thinking potentially travel to South Africa might not be a thing. I mean, I'm still hopeful for a Lions series, so yeah, we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But yeah, it's still an evolving story. The kind of tit for tat goes back and forth. Argentina seem to be out in the cold for the moment. At least South Africa and Argentina are at least kind of mentioned in this Aussie Super 8 plan. Like I said, I don't see why this couldn't be tacked on here. It may be the way I read the article, but I suppose it could be tacked on there as well. If you could get the 2, if New Zealand was going to do the Aotearoa thing, you could get top 2 teams from this competition, top 2 teams from South Africa, top 2 teams from New Zealand. Get them together, including an Argentinian team, top league team, and see how that goes. But yeah, so this is where we're at. We'll have to wait and see what the big wigs decide to do. Hopefully they talk to each other. Seems like a sensible thing to do, but you never know. The way they run things boggles the mind at times. But anyway, you guys take care. Let me know what your thoughts are. Do you have a preferred option? Can you see an option which is preferable to the ones these guys have put forward? What do you think South Africa is going to do? Do you think South Africa's best route is to kind of go down what Australia and New Zealand have been thinking about, keeping things domestic, or do you think this pushes them further into the European court? But yeah, you guys let me know your thoughts. If you haven't checked out my Patreon, links down in the description. Support the channel. More videos. Super Brew. Match day stuff. Yeah. Anyway, guys, take care, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.